First of all, thank you so much for spending your time with the Tacoma Tree Foundation. We are so grateful that you are choosing to spend your time learning with us, and sharing the community and caring for your trees. We are also so grateful for the City of Tacoma. We partner with them through the Community Tree Program, and this is a part of that program. And the goal is to enhance community and engagement, education, growth, and stewardship of Tacoma's urban forest by reducing barriers and expanding programming. And the webinar series and this training is a part of that. And we're so grateful for the city and the urban forestry team and all of their support. So thank you to them. We love them. All right, here's our simple little agenda. We've got our, I'm gonna go over some webinar logistics. We'll do a land acknowledgement. I'll introduce Sarah and hand it over to Sarah. She'll go over all the juicy details of structural pruning today. We'll have an opportunity to do a Q&A in the middle of the presentation and then towards the end as well. And then of course, we'll share fun things that the Tacoma Tree Foundation is looking forward to in the new year. All right, so next we got our webinar logistics. So all of your questions can go into the Q&A. Our chat is closed. I will see all of your questions and either I will address them privately or I will save them and we'll answer them with Sarah either during the middle of the presentation or towards the end. So please feel free to use the Q&A there. And then also, trees are beautiful and humans are flawed. Technology is complicated, so we always are grateful for your patience with technology. And yes, that is our webinar logistics. Let's see here. All right, so where we live and work. So honoring the land is important, especially the Tacoma Tree Foundation as stewards of our community. And we invite you to be reflective of how you are stewards in the community, in your neighborhoods, and in our city, and acknowledge that we always follow in the footsteps of the Puyallup people and the legacy of their stewardship, and the land and natural resources. And I invite you to take a moment to reflect on a small way that you can contribute to the healing of colonized land and the steward a right relationship with our Indigenous neighbors. Always invite folks to connect with the Puyallup People's website and the Lashutsi language website. They have incredible resources and ways to support the work that they do. Okay, structural pruning, the reason everyone is here today to get some juicy details about how to care for our trees. So Sarah Lowe is the founder of the Tacoma Tree Foundation and combines a love of trees and nature with her professional background in urban and community forestry. Sarah has been studying trees since she noticed ants on a favorite flowering dogwood when she was 10. Her curiosity for trees and nature led her to pursue a career focused on urban ecosystem health and sustainability. All along the way, Sarah found relief, healing, connection, and joy in the outdoors. Sarah provides educational talks, leads mindfulness walks, and helps to connect people to nature and to each other. Thank you so much, Sarah, always with your support for the work that we do and always being so invested in our community. We are so grateful that you are here. Okay, I'm going to stop screen share and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to share my screen, but before I do, I'm going to add something, which is that I don't always lead with this, but I am a certified, an ISA, International Society of Arboriculture certified arborist. And I mention that because there's lots of ideas out there about what is pruning and what pruning is good and when you should do which. And being a certified arborist means that you've demonstrated at least 2 years of experience, you've taken an exam, and this is, I think, the important part, is that you commit to continuing education, and that continuing education means being exposed to new information, being exposed to best practices and lessons learned from other people. And that's basically what you're engaging in today, is continuing education of some sort. And I also offered as a caveat too that, new information, arboriculture is more of a practice, is just a practice that has become a science, and that science is evolving and relatively new compared to other kinds of fields. So information, as people get more and more invested in the act of studying the practices that are used by arborists and tree care professionals and such, and foresters even. Well, that's not arboriculture, but it's a little side note there. But uh, then our understanding improves, and that's the point of continuing education, is so that we can continue to learn, continue to grow, and take in new information. And it's important because there's some like old ideas out there that don't always, we started studying them, we started studying them, understanding that maybe they don't work, or maybe they work under certain circumstances and not in others. So with that, I will share my screen. I'm going to go ahead and skip straight to this purpose of the training part and play from here. Oops. Okay. I guess it won't let me do that, but I'm going to move right on to here. And so we're focusing today structural pruning. This is a really big topic, and we could focus on trees at any stage of life and talk about structural pruning, but we're really talking about the structural pruning of young trees today. And we're thinking about it from the perspective of wanting healthy growth and wanting that healthy growth to support a thriving canopy. So the goal is thriving canopy here. And sometimes, and I say that because the goal is really important in pruning. Sometimes your goal might not actually be to improve canopy. It might be something else. And so you might use different practices. But today we're really going to talk about ways that we can help our young trees grow to be trees that provide shade, and actually I'm going to go into that a little bit too. And just to go over what canopy is, you can think of it as the layer of leaves, branches, and stems of trees that cover the ground when viewed from above. And so these stems, this is what's all these leaves and branches and stems are really supporting a lot of really important work. That work being photosynthesis. That's a really important one. Then there are more. And that thing about trees is that they have so many benefits. But I like to just mention a few of them so that we can keep them in mind when we're thinking about pruning. They cool, they reduce flooding and stormwater runoff, oxygen, that's a typo, not respiration, photosynthesis. They reduce carbon dioxide. They provide mental restoration, beautification, wildlife habitat, pollinator habitat. And some of the things that canopy in particular help with are these cooling effects of shading and this reduced stormwater flooding and aesthetics. So if we just think about cooling a little bit, we can think about the fact that shaded surfaces, for example, may be 20 to 45 degrees cooler than the peak temperatures of unshaded materials. Evapotranspiration alone or in combination with shading can help reduce peak summer temperatures by 2 to 9 degrees. And that's from the US EPA. So it's a significant difference in the cooling effects when we have canopy. But if we don't have that canopy because we pruned away all those leaves, then we will not have all that shading. And a lot of that cooling happens from the sort of mechanical aspects of the trees, the fact that those, like an umbrella, the leaves are shading, and then also because of this active evapotranspiration that actually acts like an air conditioner and kind of cools the air around us. And all those cooling benefits, they really depend on leaves and needles. And I think for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into this too much, but that canopy also supports stormwater benefits quite a bit too. One thing it does is interception. So the more leaves you have slowing down the water that gets to the ground. And the more that you slow down the water that gets to the ground, the more you can reduce that first flush of pollutants. And so that first flush means that when the ground is dry and then some water comes down on it, it's in that first flush, that first inch of rain that takes all those pollutants into the nearest stormwater outlet or waterway, whatever is closest. So if we can slow down the water with this canopy, it's really helpful. And you may have experienced this at times walking underneath a tree when it's raining and actually being relatively dry, and then walking away from the tree and discovering it's actually raining quite hard. So you can feel this tangibly the same way you can feel the benefits of shading. But the stormwater benefits depend in large part on leaves and needles. And then trees are aesthetically beautiful. It's possible to make trees aesthetically beautiful without leaves, but I think that canopies really have a lot to say, a lot to offer. The really important part of the tree. It's sort of stating the obvious there. And aesthetic benefits depend on trees being healthy too. And we'll think about trees as a living organism. And I just say that because sometimes trees are pruned as if they are, as if it's, well, like a piece of paper that you're shaping into something, and rather than a living organism that has certain needs, and those needs need to be kind of appreciated. Yeah, appreciated. All right, so let's get into the pruning part of this. So we know now that we want a healthy canopy. We know that this canopy provides all these benefits. But then how do we do it? How do we prune for a healthy canopy? And one is knowing why you're pruning. It's really one of the first things. There is sometimes a myth that trees need to be pruned regularly just because they need to be pruned. And that's really not the case. There should always be a reason why a tree is being pruned. And there can be a lot of different reasons. Some of them are not about the tree, but about the infrastructure around the tree. Say it's near a building, for instance. If a tree is near a building and those branches are moving towards the building, well, that is a great time to use pruning as a way to prevent future problems. And of course, as I was saying, remembering that the tree is a living being that needs resources to survive. And it gets a lot of those resources from the leaves. And then I like to think of it as less is more. Hopefully the tree is healthy, and then it will be there the next year and you can prune again. So you don't have to do all the things in one pass. You can do a little bit and then go back the next year, see how things are going, do a little bit more if needed. I'll probably say this again, but once you cut the branch, it's gone. So we want to avoid pruning by accident. So what are some of the reasons why we might prune a tree? In general, we can think about clearance. So for a lot of you who maybe planted some trees in the right of way, you might have to be, as they get older, you might need to be thinking about whether they are blocking sidewalks or roads. So there is an expectation of clearance above the sidewalk and above the right of way, above the road. Sight lines are sometimes a reason why people do that, why they prune. So for instance, in a parking lot, you might have trees pruned up so that people can see cars and things like that. As I mentioned, prevent future conflicts, just like a building might be in the way, it might be nearby. And I'll get into this a little bit later, but when you have a young tree, if you anticipate some of these future problems, these future conflicts, then you can cut that branch when it is small, thereby reducing the area of the cut. When it gets bigger, that's a bigger cut, so it's bigger injury to the tree. And the smaller that cut, the less likely there will be infection and things like that, pathogens and that sort of thing. And then also with particularly with young trees, you might be thinking about encouraging good form. I will get into that a little bit more, but sometimes when trees are planted, they have some funny kind of habits, and you might want to do a little pruning at that really young stage so that it can kind of develop in a good form, so good shape and that sort of thing. But I'll get into that a little bit more. And then removing hazardous branches. You're probably not going to be removing hazardous branches because we're talking about these young trees that are just been planted within the last 3 to 10 years. When you're thinking about removing hazardous branches, at that point, you really want to be talking to an arborist, a certified arborist, or a tree care company, and getting a little help with that. Hazardous has a particular definition, which I'm not going to go in today, but yeah, maybe I should now that I said that. So I guess a hazardous branch means that it's going to cause injury to a person or property or a car, something like that. So it doesn't mean it's just a dead branch. So some of the things that you might prune are dead and dying for aesthetics and safety, steep angled branch unions, crossed branches, water sprouts, and suckers, root suckers. And we'll go into this in more detail. So if you're wondering what are these and why, we'll go into more detail. So questions asked before you even get to your tree. Has the tree been established, or is it established? So when I say that, I mean, has it had a chance to get its roots to grow away from where it's been planted? And is it able to kind of actually increase its canopy since it's been planted? So you might notice that sometimes the first couple of years a tree is planted, it's just kind of holding steady. It might not be growing a ton. And certainly the same thing might be happening in the roots. It might not have like really developed that root. The roots might have broken away from the area just where, you were tamping the ground that previous couple of years ago. So it becomes more obvious in the summer when you start seeing, or in the spring when you start seeing more vigorous growth. And then you can start feeling a little more confident about pruning. And you can kind of, as a rule of thumb, like you don't really want to be pruning trees until they're at least 2 or 3 years after planting. And then the second question, just to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, is does the tree need to be pruned? It might not need to be pruned. Just because it's been planted 3 years ago doesn't mean some action needs to happen. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, because because sometimes we start to think like, it's been 3 years, it's time to do, it's like a checklist. It's like time to do the pruning, and then in the next year, it's time to do the pruning. And plants don't really work like that. They are kind of on their own schedule. They have a schedule, but it's on their schedule. All right, so getting into the dead and dying branches. It's okay to prune dead and dying branches. Oh, it says drying, but that's supposed to be dying. Sorry about that. It's okay to prune dead and dying branches anytime. However, keep in mind that oftentimes it's more for aesthetic purposes than anything else. And those dead branches might actually be serving a purpose. Sorry, this isn't actually a dead branch here, but I have seen hummingbirds kind of hang out on dead branches. And so that's not uncommon. Stellar jays do that too. Lots of birds kind of use it as a place to hang out. And so maybe they can even get some insects from those branches. So consider that. It might not be that you need to. Pruning isn't kind of like tidying up. We're not tidying up the tree. So keep in mind other benefits of having the branches. But for sure, we don't, if you're in the right of way and there's a dead branch and it's sort of near the sidewalk, you don't want someone, it's like the the movie, you don't want to poke your eye out. So now we're going to get into a little bit deeper here. Steep and angled branch unions. So you won't be looking, this is like a bigger tree that we have this drawing. And you won't be doing that kind of pruning, but when you're doing the structural pruning with the young tree, you do want to be thinking about how is this tree going to grow up later? Like, what's it going to look like later? Where is the growth going to happen, right? And so here's a drawing. I wonder if you can see my cursor. This is a pointer. Okay, I'm going to experiment here. Laser pointer. Okay, great. All right, so here's here's a tree right here, and the branch union is this part, the place where the tree is connecting. Sorry, the branch is connecting to the main stem. And this is considered a good branch union because there's a lot of space here. It's angled away from the tree, so it's not a steep, it's not a steep angle. And then over here we have a steep angled branch union, which is not considered a very good branch union because something happens right here. It's called included bark, and you can see an image here of that not that included bark, but of included bark. And what happens is basically the tree grows with the bark inside, and that's considered just kind of a problematic area. You're more likely to have problems here, and then the result down the road is that this branch might not do well in the long term. Like it might be more likely to fail. And in this case, it would be this branch. And you can also see that often this branch will end up also being, well, no, I'm going to leave it there. All right, so now we're going to move. I'm going to go back just for a second because I feel like I sort of didn't tie up the loose ends there. So here we have this poor branch union. And if you're looking at a young tree, you can remove the one branch, the one with the steep angled branch, and allow this branch to become more dominant. And then you don't have to worry so much. This will heal over time. Heal, I'm using that loosely. It's not technically healing, but it will have, the bark will grow over the cut, and then your tree won't have this problematic bark, included bark. Okay, so moving on to cross branches. I don't have really the most wonderful photos here, but here is what happens over time. Cross branching happens, and then sometimes the tree will actually, the two branches will actually grow together. And then you end up essentially with more of that included bark, potentially, or they might also just be rubbing against each other, which causes a wound in the branches, and then you have some vulnerability there. But when they're younger, it might look more like this that we have with this tree right here, that the branches are just sort of rubbing against each other kind of regularly. And that's kind of an easy fix when the branch is young, small. You can just decide which one is going to be the more dominant branch. And this one's actually, it looks like this branch is dead. So that would be even easier. You know, you can just cut the dead branch and you're good to go. And this isn't a terrific picture, but this is a newly planted tree, and you can see, I'm pretty sure these are Zelkovas, and some trees are just more likely to have certain branch unions and certain kind of issues, I guess you could say. And so right now the branches are really close to each other, and that might be something where you want to just decide which branches are going to, you're going to favor to the benefit of the tree. And what you're looking at here is just a few branches. It's actually, I think it's 3 branches that are all kind of clustered together, and they rub in various spots right here. And then we have root suckers. It generally looks like this, a whole bunch of growth near the bottom of the tree. And often that is the result of lawnmower damage, or sometimes actually deer or rodents or something that are interacting with the bottom of the tree. Should have added in a picture of what it looks like when you remove the root suckers. And you can cut these root suckers, but it's important to realize too that, or to keep an eye out for whatever damage might have caused that root sucker. Some trees are just more likely to have root suckers, and sometimes when you have grafting, you'll see the root stock of the graft, or the tree that was used for the graft, trying to emerge, and then you would also cut those. Okay. I get the question a lot of when to prune trees. And it's kind of you know, and it depends a little bit, it depends. But um, like I said before, you can be thinking about pruning trees 2 or 3 years after they're planted. Um, the general rule of thumb is to avoid the fall. And if we think about what's happening with trees in the fall, they, um, if they're deciduous, for instance, they'll have all those leaves out. It's their last chance to pull all those sugars and things back into the tree before they drop their leaves. And you don't really want to interfere with that. There's just like let it happen. And then when the tree is dormant um, in the winter, you can do that. Sometimes people uh, worry about rain and pruning. And that is pretty hard around here because it's hard not to prune. People are pruning trees even in the winter because it's often raining in the winter. But it's good to avoid the rainy days per se. Um, and then you can also do it um, the in the summer even, as long as it's not a drought. And you can do it in the spring before the buds break. Once the buds break, you want to wait because oh, I didn't even realize that rhyme almost rhymes. Once the buds break, wait. Anyway, um, think again about what's happening to the trees at that time. A lot of energy is being pushed up towards the plant, and you don't want to really interfere with that major activity of the tree trying to bring all those resources up to the leaves to allow that photosynthesis to happen. So you wait for them to finish that, and then you can start thinking about pruning again. And like I said before, dead and dying can be done at any time as far as the tree goes. Some must do's. Wear gloves. I have I have lots of little scars on my hands from days when I thought I was just going to do one thing and then cut myself with pruning shears. And pruning shears are very sharp, and so are all the other tools that are used for pruning trees. Also use sharp tools because sharp tools will cut better, which makes it safer for you and also better for the tree. And then before you cut, make sure that you are actually looking at the tree carefully. Uh, um, I also teach mindfulness, right? And so I think about that when I'm pruning a tree, that it's actually an opportunity to be to be mindful, to really notice what's happening with the tree and what the plan is, kind of. What is your goal? And um, what will happen if you cut one branch or part of a branch? What would that do for the rest of the tree? How does that sort of fit in to its future experience? And keeping in mind that once you cut, you can't undo it. So, um, you know, you don't have to go fast. Take your time, one cut at a time, knowing that you can always come back. Tree's not going anywhere, right? So you can come back later and look at it again, make a new decision. Um, always leave some leaves. Kind of a rule of thumb from the University of Florida Extension, which is a fantastic resource. And actually, yeah, I should maybe I'll ask Jayla to send a link if that is possible. But they have wonderful resources, and that's a group that is consistently doing research on practices in arboriculture. But they recommend pruning no more than 20% of the canopy per year, which can be kind of hard to do. But if you think about it, and you just kind of imagine the tree as a whole, and then if it becomes more obvious as you take away a lot of branches, but 20% of the canopy is not a ton. So that means that you can't really prune a lot of the tree at any given time. You need to plan it out. Um, and that's not as big of, and so if you think about that with like a young tree, which maybe only has a handful of branches, if it only has 20 branches, then you should really only be cutting one of them, right? Some tools of the trade, bypass hand pruners, bypass loppers, curved tapered toothed hand saws. Those are the best. Um, but the bypass pruners, I'm trying to do this with my hand. You can see the bypass pruners here. Let me see if I can move this so I can. Let's look at the loppers. So these have this curve here. When you open it up, you should be able to put you can, the branch fits in there and it will cut it. If it's not a bypass hand pruner or a lopper, it will smush it. So if it kind of has this rather than this action, if it has this action, then it will squish the plant, which will not help the tree recover from the cut. Oops. Okay, there we go. Also want to talk about cleaning tools. Cleaning tools is something that, oh, I mean, I think it's easy to kind of forget to do it or not think about it, but it becomes more of an issue as we start seeing pathogens come and go. There's one in particular, sooty bark disease. That's something that I understand can be moved from tree to tree through tools. One that was Dutch elm disease was one that could be moved through pruning shears and loppers and things like that and saws. But there are all these, this is kind of one of those, like, there are lots of ideas about how to sterilize equipment. And one thing is to remove the debris and dirt. That's super helpful. It's first thing you do. And that's great for the lifetime of your equipment. So if you want to get things to last longer, which I hope you do, because that's a great thing to do, the longer we can keep these tools working, the better it is for everybody, for our wallets and for the environment. And then the one that I just mentioned somebody here, another person who is sort of um, in the world of studying practices, among other things, Linda Chalker Scott, nearby in Washington State University, wrote a fact sheet on caring for your equipment and wrote one on the myth of Clorox clippers, which I really appreciate because Clorox is bleach is really dangerous. And I don't know about you, but I've been trying to kind of move away from using bleach in any part of um, my life. And she recommends Lysol spray, which is something that many people have in their household. So you may not even need to go out and buy something, and it's easy to apply, and it protects trees from pathogens. Not universally, just keep that in mind. But okay, I thought we'd pause here for questions. And we'll probably just select a few questions to discuss, and then we'll move on. And if we miss any questions, we can go back to them at the end.
Awesome. Yeah, we got good ones. Would you recommend the same kind of pruning schedule for shrubs and bushes as you suggested
Oh,
earlier?
yeah.
Like avoiding the fall?
Hmm. Well, yeah, I think as far as shrubs and bushes, shrubs of various sorts, you want to pay attention to what's happening to the plant. Like if it's in the middle of doing something really important, like pushing out leaves or
Mhm.
pulling down nutrients. So that tends to be spring and fall for a lot of our plants, not for all of them, but um, otherwise, generally, if it's a woody plant, you can go by the rest of the rules, like um, winter being an okay time, and the summer if it's not stressed. So you
Awesome.
want to stay away from drought periods because um, that's a little well, actually, that's kind of even debatable, but stay away from the fall and avoid when buds are breaking.
Yeah, and you would suggest that same schedule for fruit trees as well?
Oh, fruit trees are kind of a different ball of wax. So I would say there are other practices in fruit trees that I'm not going to talk about. I'd say all the things I'm discussing work for fruit trees, but sometimes you can do other things with fruit trees that you wouldn't do with a tree in the right of way.
Right.
or in your yard.
Mhm. And then, in regards to sanitizing, would you also suggest rubbing alcohol? Sanitizing tools?
Um, hmm, I don't know. I mean, I did in the past. I have in the past, but I sort of feel like if Linda's Chalker Scott says to use Lysol, um then I'm gonna use Lysol.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think it's probably fine to use the rubbing alcohol, but um if somebody who has paid closer attention to this than I have says Lysol, then I'm kind of in favor of that.
yeah. And then there's just one question that's probably we could do our own long webinar on is just how and what you use to sharpen tools. Is there anything you want to say about sharpening tools?
Oh, no, I would say that there are a couple of tool sharpening companies around, like small shops that
Mhm.
do that work, and that would be my recommendation is to go to them. Um, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
That's what we got so far. Folks keep putting them in the chat, and we'll jump back into those questions a little bit later on in the webinar.
Okay, terrific. Thanks everybody, and thank you, Jayla.
Mhm.
Now we're going to get into into more detail here. So let's buckle up. Uh, we're going to talk about some pruning cuts. So there are a few kinds that people talk about, particularly, and reduction cuts are one. That's when you cut a larger branch to a smaller branch to reduce the length of a branch. So I have an example here, also from the University of Florida. So you see a trend there. And so what you're seeing here is there's this little branch here, and notice the diameter of that branch is much smaller than the diameter of the branch that's being cut. And it's being cut back, so the idea is that you cut it back here. This probably had more growth associated with it, and now you have this shrub. Sorry, not shrub. This branch has a chance to become a larger branch, but to do it in a way that's yeah, yeah. I guess that's all there is to it. We're just prioritizing the smaller branch here. Um, and this What we don't want to do is a heading cut. So this is a heading cut is when you cut kind of in between. These are nodes here, or we could think of them as nodes, these branches right here, cutting kind of indiscriminately in the middle. We generally want to avoid that. Okay, and this is Ed Gilman and Jason Grabowski. Ed Gilman from, you'll guess it, University of Florida. uh, So he wrote discoloration in the less efficient compartmentalizing species of Shumard oak was related to cut surface area, but not to cut angle. The data suggests that reduction cuts can be made back to lateral branches as small as 1/3 the diameter of the removed stem. So just, oops, we'll go back here. Um, so that's actually what this is. Like that's a third right there, and that's, I mean, I think you could say that that's probably what he's trying to demonstrate here. Is this is, if you added these together, this is 1/3, 2, 3/3 to make your whole. You wouldn't want to have a even smaller branch than that, is what he's recommending. And also you can see here, this is a angle cut. Uh, Less efficient compartmentalizing species was related to cut surface area. So now what people are talking, this is what a lot of folks like me learned, that this angled cut was the thing to do. But now people are talking about, well, if you can make this surface area right here even smaller by reducing the angle, you can reduce that surface area and therefore help the plant heal faster. Oh, yeah. So in other words, smaller surface area means less chance of, I'm saying infection, but it's like pathogens and problems that can come with a wound. So another kind of cut is a removal cut, when you cut the entire branch to a branch collar. I don't have a photograph of that, but that's basically a more significant cut. All right, so now we're making the cut. And I'm looking at this, and so the first question is like, why are we pruning this branch? And in this case, um, we would probably not actually cut that branch because why? There's no reason to cut that branch. But if we were, for some reason, let's say there's a building over here next to these folks, and we we need to cut the branch for that reason, then we would start by making one cut part the way through the branch, maybe a third to a halfway into the branch. And then we'd make a second cut starting from the top and going through, cutting off the branch. And then we would come over here and make a third cut all the way through. And so if you do it this way, what happens is you avoid the peeling effect that happens if you make one cut. And if the branch is too heavy and you make that one cut and it's not a clean cut, you might have this peeling action that happens down here. And that peeling action might go right into the branch collar, which is like the hardest part for the tree to heal from. So what I want you to notice here also is that this third cut is not made right at the stem, at the main stem. It's not made right here. It's made actually on the branch. And if you take a closer look, oh, I can zoom in. Oh, okay. Is everybody, do you see it zoomed in?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. This is good. I'm glad this is like a reasonably um, high resolution photo. Oh, actually, super high resolution photo because a professional photographer took this picture, I think. That was not me. So basically what I want you to see here though is this wrinkling that's happening right here. And it looks different on every kind of tree. Um, but the sort of the cellular structure behind this wrinkling is different than what's happening everywhere else. So if you see it's nice and it's kind of smooth here, and then wrinkled here. And what you want to do is avoid, so if you cut into that, it just makes it a lot harder for the tree to heal. So when you're looking at a tree, and it's a good practice now, like, after maybe tomorrow, if you're walking around, take a look at these branch attachments, um, and see if you can see where the collar is and like how far up the branch it goes. Here it seems like it's kind of hard to tell, right? Because this tree has all that peeling bark, but you can kind of see it looks like it goes right about here this way and then down to here this way. And so you really want to avoid that. Now, I mentioned earlier on that this is a practice and different ideas emerge and then people kind of test it out to see if these different ideas are the way to go or not. And one idea that has been coming up, people have been discussing lately, is the idea of actually pushing this third cut back out to here so that you leave some of the branch to compartmentalize on its own, so that basically what happens then is you end up letting the tree um, remove all the water and everything. So all the living, yeah, all the water essentially goes back into the main stem, and this part of the branch would just eventually die. And then you could come back a year later and cut that off, and you'd only be cutting off dead branches, or the tree will just lose that branch at some time. I'm not necessarily recommending that because I think word's still out about whether that's a good practice. But what I've been doing is paying attention to what's happening to trees that lose branches naturally, and what's happening to that branch, that piece of the branch that's left on the tree after the branch falls down. Um, and so, yeah, I'm still open to different ideas about that, I guess. But if you're working with a small tree, you don't really have to worry about that too much. You just need to worry about avoiding this branch collar here. Okay, so I'm gonna keep on about the branch collar. And this is uh just some illustrations of different here's yeah, they called it the bark ridge. Here is this piece where the part where it connects to the main stem, and then you have this branch collar here. But this is a drawing, and like you can see, even this drawing looks a little different than what we saw with the photograph that I showed. So again, a great thing to look around and see if you see the edges of the ridges. Oh, yeah, here's another one that looks a little bit more like our image right there, but not so much like this tree here. And this is basically just, oh yeah, this is kind of this from Kim Coder from a presentation that he did um, a year or so ago. And what you're seeing here is that you can kind of just notice from this illustration that the cells are different around this branch attachment. And then I want to show you, I think it's in next. Yes, okay. I went camping last summer, and one of the pieces of wood that we were using for our fire uh, just popped open like this, and I was like, "Ooh!" You can see what's happening underneath. So if we start on the left, this right here is where the branch came out, and then this is you can kind of still see the branch collar. It's hard, but you can still see the branch collar. You can see how it's a different shape. You know, there's like a shape to it. There's a roundness around that branch. And if we look at it from the side, we can see where the branch comes out here. You can see again how it kind of bulges a little there. And then you can see here's the tree that, of course, dead here, but the tree on the other side of that branch. And here we are here. It just it broke, split open a little bit, and you could see the branch. So this at the tip here is the part you see right there. And that's what's underneath all of this. And there's still more beyond that, right? So the original branch probably grew from the tree when it was very young, kind of over here. And then every year, another layer of plant tissue continues to form. And so what's happening is every year that branch is part of that tree and the tree continues to grow, it is more and more supported with each year. You can kind of see what it looks like on the other side here. I think that's really important because I think, do I have, maybe let's see the next slide might, oh, I guess I just, okay. Um, well, keep that in mind because I think I should have put the slide right here, but um, I think that what I really want to take away, want you to think about is that when you prune properly, and you protect the tree so it can grow, it can, like, the branch collar is left alone, and it can heal. You're supporting all these years of growth, right? And then just keep that in mind because we're gonna come back to it a little bit later. Um, well, I guess I'll come back to it right now because we have this heading. So if you make a heading cut, you'll end up getting all this little growth right here. All that little growth will not have those years of support that are underneath this branch collar. Okay. So before we go any further though, I did want to talk a little bit about um, pollarding and topping. So often when we talk about topping, what's happening is at the top of the tree, there's an indiscriminate cut that that looks kind of like is a heading cut usually. And sometimes people see this topping and they think that it is pollarding. And sometimes people see pollarding and they think it's topping. And so I thought it just kind of add a little clarity here as much as I can. And so pollarding is intentional practice. It's planned year after year. There's this maintenance element that comes with it. There's still heading cuts and they still intend to stimulate growth of small branches, and these are those small branches that will not really have any support. But here's where it's a little different is that those small branches are removed every year, generally from the same place. And so what you end up having are these knuckles, and you can see these in a lot of like historic sites in Europe will have these big pollarded trees, and this practice has been used for like 50 to 75 to 100 years on some of these trees. Um, I saw some beautiful examples and I couldn't find any pictures, but um, this mosque outside of a historic mosque in Istanbul, all these like really old trees that had been pollarded, which meant that people have been coming back year after year and cutting from the same area, cutting those small branches every year. Because they're small branches, kind of going back to what we were saying at the beginning, because they're cutting the small branch, there's healing happening between from one year to the next. So topping is a more indiscriminate cut. It's generally a heading cut, so kind of like just cutting across the top is often what I see. It creates a lot of stress on a tree, and it's that stress that stimulates a lot of growth. This kind of effort for the tree to continue um, to respond to this kind of attack that's happened. Um, and then what you get are a lot of these small branches, but those small branches are sometimes left to grow to be larger branches. And so what happens is they become weakly attached. There's a weak attachment there because they haven't had those years of support that come with that branch collar. And then oftentimes they're very large cuts. They're not these tiny cuts of small branches like what you might do with your young tree in your right of way. They're really significant cuts. So if we think about that, demonstrate this are two rules of thumb that we've heard, at least two that we've heard so far, not removing more than 20% of the canopy, and um, cutting a branch to a third branch, cutting um, a branch that's 2/3 the size of a smaller branch. That actually, it's not three times. mm, My math. Oh, uh, cutting back to a branch that's 1/3 the size of the larger branch. So if you're cutting really big branches, then likelihood is that you're cutting a significant amount of the canopy in one cut, and you're probably cutting something much bigger to a much smaller. So you've lost that 1/3 to 2/3 ratio. Um, yeah. So again, in both cases, you're removing a lot of canopy, and both cases, you get a lot of canopy as a result. You get a lot of stimulated growth. But the difference is that the pollarding is done year after year from the same location, so they're very many small cuts, and the topping is often big cuts that lead to weak attachments that are sometimes left, and that's where we start getting nervous. Um, don't want to. Yeah, here are some trees I have seen recently, and what you can notice here. I mean, if we look at the picture on the left, those are very large branches that have been cut. There's kind of no confusing that for pollarding. Um, the most of the canopy has been removed, and it may be, it may actually be in this case that the intention is to remove the tree. Um, it's never sometimes not clear to me, like so much of the canopy is removed that I sometimes wonder if the tree is being cut down or is it intended to stay that way. The one on the right, this seems like it was done intentionally to keep the tree and not necessarily as a step along the way. But you can actually see on the tree on the right, it is almost a straight line, zoop, right across, which means that you get lots of small branches coming out from each one of these. So it may look like there's a lot of growth there the next year, but all those branches will have that weak attachment without the branch collar. And I mention this because I don't think you're here to top your trees, and I hope that you don't. But I think I hope that one of the things you take away from this is that not only do you want to be careful about the young trees that you're planting, but also keeping an eye out on, if you are having some tree work done, you can be specific about what kind of work that you want done on that tree too. So not indiscriminate cuts, but rather reduction cuts is what you would ask for. Okay, and so the consequences of topping is that it leads to decay, these pockets of decay and branches. That decay then moves to the roots. Um, you get these weak branch attachments, which when they get larger, kind of following through on that thought, when they get larger, they become that's when you start seeing hazardous branches that are prone to failing. And then you get a high twig density, which sometimes is what, is I think kind of one of the things that people hope will happen is that you get a lot of growth and get a lot of twigs. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, I kind of see it as like the tree is trying desperately to stay alive. So it's likely, depending on when that's happening, well, no matter what, but it's going to be pulling a lot of resources from the roots to respond to that large cut. And then that makes the tree vulnerable also. All right. Okay, so alternatives is rather than cutting all of it, is to do a 10% reduction pruning, which is basically what we've been talking about. You take you do reduction pruning, so you're taking branches down to a smaller branch. You are not cutting more than 20% of all the canopy. And so you can think about this with younger plants too. Wanted to talk a little bit about the leader because that is a little bit more well, it's important no matter what, but when you have a young tree, there's sometimes an idea that you want a certain like round shape like a lollipop. And but really, if we can maintain this leader, we can help the tree grow in a good form. And not all trees have a really strong leader habit. But here, this is, I think, a young deodar cedar. They do have like a really strong leader. And if you keep that leader all the way, like starting from the very beginning, then you're going to have a tree that's going to have really nice form all along the way. Maybe something like what you see here on the right, which is an older deodar cedar over at Titlow Park. Um, but so you don't want to cut that piece at the top if you can help it. You might want to cut something lower. Like at some point the tree is going to be limbed up, so at some point you might want to start cutting some of those lower branches, but don't have haste with that. I mean, I really like it when trees have low branches, but sometimes you don't want that. Like you wouldn't necessarily want that in a place. This one's out of school, so you wouldn't necessarily want kids to be climbing that tree as it gets older. So you would selectively prune up as it's young, when it's younger, so that it's just easier on the tree. Okay. It's just an example of a tree that doesn't have a strong leader. And one of the things you can do with a young tree that is harder to do when it gets older is that you can make some adjustments here. In this case, you might want to, well, basically the decision you want to make is which of these two branches, these are codominant branches right here, which means they're sort of similarly sized, connected at similar spot, and you want to just choose one that's going to be your dominant stem, your dominant leader, and then cut the other one. So in this case, you might want to cut this one. Sometimes what people will do is they'll cut higher up, and that will still help the other branch be a dominant stem, be a dominant leaf branch, yes. And the reason why you might want to do that young is when it gets older, you might have this kind of situation. And what we have here is again that included bark that we saw earlier, which means that there's some bark growing into that tree, which makes it more vulnerable. We also have two very similarly sized trees, and these are more likely to fail. And I say that based on things that I've heard that came out of research environments, people looking at tree failure. Okay, and then I wanted to kind of have a word on shape, and I wanted to start with a dogwood because dogwoods have this, in my mind, a really beautiful form. It's this kind of layered effect that happens. They don't always have a strong leader. Um, they have some roundness, but it's a little bit more of a natural look, right? It seems ironic to say that because all trees are natural, um, but what I wanted to say here is that if you plant a dogwood, for instance, accept it as a dogwood and don't try to turn it into a red maple through pruning. Because the thing is that if you prune a tree, it is still, you prune a tree outside differently than its form, it's going to want to return to that form like a little bit, it's just that's what it's going to do. It's going to try to grow more like it was growing before. And so you'll just have to keep pruning. But if you wanted a red maple, plant the red maple and don't worry about the dogwood. Um, yeah, hope that makes sense. And I'll just share this real quick. Different trees have different kinds of form, and this is a really coarse thing to consider, but they often can be kind of put into different categories in the um, whether they're irregular or weeping or arching. Sometimes would be called vase-shaped, pyramidal, like that deodar cedar we saw a few minutes ago, broad or round. Maybe like a Bradford pear would fit in that round category. Columnar. Um, so if you had an irregularly shaped tree and you tried to prune it to be columnar, you might run into some problems. So keeping in mind the form of the tree that you're looking at, which might mean that if you're not really sure what its adult form or this more mature tree form looks like, then maybe time to get to know your tree a little better with some research online. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, we're almost done. Um, so what I want to say there is that plant the right tree to meet your intention. So if you have an intention about the way the tree looks, plant the right tree and then go from there. And then I guess that's sort of where I was going to wrap things up with the final questions. So anybody have any questions? I hope that you take away a few things in particular. One is that to protect that branch collar, to protect the leader as much as you can, um, to prune with care, and not prune too much, maybe not at all if you don't need it. If you're not sure if you need it, then maybe you don't need it. If you see cross branches, that's something you can address with some simple pruning when they're young. If you see some codominant stems, that's something you can address when they're young. Yeah. And dead and dying branches can be good for birds.
Awesome. We just have one question in the chat, and it was around when you were talking about pruning, and disease and the vocabulary word of compartmentalization. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and pests?
Yeah. Well, plants are cool because they use compartmentalization to do all sorts of things. For instance, one you might see a lot is like Douglas fir in the woods. They will, if a lower branch is not getting any sunlight at some point because the tree's grown so big and is surrounded by other trees, it will, it will kind of, it will stop sending nutrients to and water to that branch and therefore um, basically shut down the cells in that branch so that it will just die and fall off. And it can do the same thing in response to a wound as well. It will stop sending water and nutrients to to that wound so that it starts to sort of shut down the cells and um, yeah. So that's basically it's kind of just like it's closing the doors. That's the way
Mm,
I imagine it's like it's just closing doors until it gets to the place where it's advantageous for it to grow.
right. Awesome. Well, I'm going to drop in the chat a link so folks can share feedback and what they learned. We always want to hear what folks enjoyed about it and if there's anything else we can provide during our webinars. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah.
for sharing your expertise and your passion. It's very clear that you love trees. And before we close out, I just want to shout out the things that we've got going on at the Tacoma Tree Foundation. So this Friday, I will be at the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department over by 38th. Um, be sharing trees, so please send folks over. We've got trees for folks. We've got fruit trees. We've got fir trees. And that'll be from 11 to 4. Think about what kind of trees you want on your property, and we'll send them home with you. And then looking towards January, we've got a big planting project happening at the Port of Tacoma, which is really exciting. So keep your eye out for that. We will be putting a volunteer registration out for that. We're really excited. We're going to plant over 100 trees. And on the same day, you can kind of pick and choose your pleasure here. We're also hosting a mindfulness walk 11 to 12, and then doing a tree share at the University of Puget Sound, culminating a project that we've been working on. And then later in January, we're still working on the dates and the time we're going to get our tree stewards training revved up so folks can really think about stewarding the trees in their neighborhood and helping their neighbors cultivate healthy and happy trees. So we're all excited about those. Hope to see you on Friday with the tree share. And then just a quick plug that we have tons of different webinars. This will get recorded and posted on the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of these to continue your learning and your education on our website. So take a peek at that. And thank you so much for coming. Please, fill out that survey there. Um, and give us some points about what you learned and what you enjoyed. The tree shares are for everybody. We do prioritize Tacoma residents, but we don't turn anyone away. So go ahead and send your Tacoma people, but also your unincorporated Pierce County as well. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.